There's nothing really wrong in this image. I wanted to show you this just to give you an example of, again, goes back to that low delta T environment, high delta T environment. This is a garage ceiling. As everybody knows, garages are typically not insulated. Attics are very hot, and we have a very good temperature differential here, delta T, and because of that, there's a lot of detail in this image. We can see the ceiling joists very clearly. We can even see that these people have some personal items stored up in their attic on top of the ceiling panels. That's what those little dark spots are, boxes and such. Probably the biggest misconception about this technology is that many people feel that it's X-ray vision and that it can actually see through walls. And the truth is that it's just not the case. A thermal camera displays surface temperatures in the form of a thermograph, a picture if you will, and that thermograph has to be interpreted by a skilled and trained thermographer. One of the realities of thermography, because it cannot see through objects, is that it does have many of the same limitations as a naked eye inspection. And a good example is a traditional home inspection, just a regular naked eye inspection. The inspector cannot see through furniture. He can't see through people's clothing and closets. And a thermal camera is no different. Our camera does not give us the ability to see those things. So in a very real sense, the limitations are the same. The best description in medical terms is that an infrared inspection is about a step below an X-ray or an MRI. Very important consideration is that the camera and the person holding it can be fooled or blinded by environmental conditions. And we have a really good example of that here. If you remember from previous images, we recognize a dark blue spot as a moisture signature. Now this is actually at my house, and it's looking at the tiles at the front door, and by looking at that image you would think that, wow, there's a moisture problem under my tiles. And I actually set this up on purpose. I opened up my front door so I can get the reflection of the sky on that image. Anybody that's ever flown in an airplane knows that up at 30,000 feet, even on a hot 90-degree day in Florida, it's about 20 degrees below zero up at altitude. By opening my front door, I'm getting the reflection of that cold from the sky on my tile, making it look like a moisture signature. Again, this is a very normal condition that could be misinterpreted by somebody that doesn't have training. Protection is one of the big factors, and I've mentioned this several places throughout this presentation, is that infrared often gives a more complete picture of the extent of a condition, thereby increasing the accuracy of the diagnosis. And we simply cannot put a price on this type of information. In fact, the repair folks that come in after us to fix these problems, they simply love this kind of information because it really does diagnose things at a level that is simply unheard of. In a very real sense, an inspection is a compilation of information. More information is always better. This is an interesting myth or fact in the form of a question. Your automobile is the largest source of energy waste that the average American is personally responsible for. Surprisingly, that's a myth. The average home emissions generate more than double of the carbon dioxide, which is a principal greenhouse gas, than the car does. And that's because most of the energy consumed in your house is produced by burning fossil fuels. And here's a good example of that. We find this in quite a few houses. The average American home, this is a staggering figure here, loses as much as 20% of the distributed air, and that's the air that's moved around your house by your air handler, loses 20% of it into unfinished spaces and the exterior. And you can see that in this thermograph. The fact that the ceiling joists can be seen in this photo and they're showing up as cold tells me that there's some cold air leaking in there that's cooling off those joists. Investing in an infrared inspection can repay your inspection fee over and over again throughout the life of the home. Documentation, we've talked about this before, but here's a really good example. We have a wine cooler on the left, a hot tub on the right. So we don't have to merely state that these components are functioning, we can actually document it for the client. Very common problem here in Florida. As houses get fancier, roof lines become more complicated. We have a lot of valleys, a lot of dormers that stick up at the bottom of valleys, as in the case of this one. This house was brand new. In fact, it wasn't quite finished yet when we did this inspection. They were still inside doing some finishing cosmetic work. When we looked at this dormer wall over the front entrance, we found a very clear moisture signature with the infrared camera. We took a scanning moisture meter, ran it over that spot. We confirmed that it was in fact wet, and because of the valley located above that, water was running down that valley, running up into the wall and over the top of the flashing. In about 2 or 3 months after this house was built, this wall would have started to fall apart had we not looked at it with the thermal camera. Any guesses what we're looking at here? This is very rare in Florida, but this is actually a radiant floor heating system. Very popular up north. This was the only house I came across so far with this system installed. Traditionally, before the advent of infrared, you'd have to turn one of these systems on and hope that it got hot enough that you could feel it with your hand by the time your inspection was over. Since these coils have to heat up concrete, it could take several hours to get warm to the touch. With the thermal camera, we could look at that floor, and within 2 or 3 minutes, we'll begin to see the coils. So again, this is kind of a neat little feature where we can find things that previously we had no way of looking at them. Here's an example of how we can be fooled by the inspection that we perform visually. Top left image, there was actually some staining on the wall next to this shower, and it's very easy to put 2 and 2 together and think that this condition was caused by plumbing. When we looked at this room with the thermal camera, we found that it was coming up closer to the ceiling, and a moisture signature ran all the way down the wall. Outside this wall was an air conditioner, and the refrigerant lines passed up into this wall. And what was happening, the lines weren't insulated, water was condensating on them, and it was getting inside the wall. This image is actually out of the same house. As we left the bathroom and started going through the bedrooms, we could literally see where this refrigerant line was dripping condensation on the ceiling all the way across the house. So very cool what this technology can find. This was a historic property, and beautifully renovated historic property. It almost looked like a new house. Out on the front porch, there's a balcony, and the balcony had an access to the second floor. But everything looked normal. There were no problems with it. But when we looked at the balcony ceiling with the thermal camera, we saw the telltale darkened moisture signature. It turned out that this balcony was leaking around the threshold, and it had a roofing membrane that wasn't properly flashed. Again, if it was not for thermography, I would have walked right past this condition. About a month or 2 later, after things would start to rot and decay and fall apart, I would have gotten a call from a very angry homeowner. And the real estate agent would have gotten a call from an angry homeowner. So in a very real sense, this technology just benefits everybody involved in the transaction. Is there anything I should look for when selecting an inspector? Absolutely. First and foremost, you should ensure that they are a licensed home inspector. Florida recently enacted licensing legislation. It took effect on July 1st of this year. The drop-dead date for submission of your package to the state to get licensed is March of 2011. Now, we've already received our license. We got it early. But we do recommend that you ask the question. There may be a reason that some home inspectors are waiting. We also recommend that you ensure they're certified as an inspector and thermographer and not trust the fact that they're merely licensed. Licensing just means that that inspector has met a minimum requirement imposed by the state. Always look for an inspector that has gone that extra mile, received extra training and certification through a nationally recognized association. And lastly, be very afraid of the cheap inspector. More often than not, they don't have insurance, they don't have training in thermography, they lack experience, or they simply went out and bought the cheapest infrared camera they could find just to get in the game. At the end of the day, the best price is rarely the best value. And what's interesting here is, at least from our standpoint, we have an $8,000 camera. We've spent hundreds of dollars on training and certification. We've spent hundreds of hours on follow-up training and research. That's not something that most people would give away for free. So keep that in mind when somebody tells you they will throw in infrared for free just to get your business. At the end of the day, an infrared inspection is not significantly more expensive than a regular inspection. As an example, our price difference for an infrared inspection really ranges from about $25 to only as high as $100 depending on the size of the house. So it's not an exorbitantly expensive technology.
I don't see any questions this morning. I'd like to thank you